Hello and welcome to Mac Power Users. My name is Stephen Hackett, and I'm joined by my friend and yours, Mr. David Sparks.
Hey, Steven. Happy New Year, buddy.
Happy New Year!
It's always fun starting off a new year together. Do you get that feeling in New Year like, hey, I want to do some stuff better? I think it's almost an irresistible force, right?
I think it is a pretty irresistible force, but I don't know. I don't think anything major is going to change in 2025.
Yeah.
I'm pretty happy with where things ended up at the end of last year, but you never know.
Yeah. My
You know?
big one this year is I don't really want to reduce the amount of stuff I'm doing, but I don't want to increase it either.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to spend more time doing stuff for me, like
Sure.
health stuff, wood shop stuff. So
Sabbatical.
that's, yeah, I will see. I'm going to do something this year. I don't know if I want to use the word sabbatical though, because that's so loaded, right? I
Yeah.
mean, for people and academics and stuff. But I definitely want to take a little time off for myself. I don't
Good.
know when.
Yeah, you
We'll
should.
figure it out. Anyway, that's not why we're here. It's first show of the year. We've been talking, you and me, for about 6 months now about task managers offline. We've both been just kind of feeling our way through the environment right now, and I thought we had enough to do a pretty good show on it because task managers have definitely evolved over the last few years, and I think it's time to check in.
Yeah, it's a good beginning of the year topic as well. So well timed.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. I want to talk about, before we get into apps, though, I want to just talk about task management and task managers in general.
Okay.
I think one of the big observations you can make now that you couldn't have made 10 years ago is that there are a lot of good ones. It used to be most of them were pretty bad, except a couple. So when people asked you, it was very easy to give advice, this one or that one. Kind of, OmniFocus or things. That was it for so long, right? But that's not the case anymore. You and I have talked about how Reminders has upped its game, but there's also a lot of third-party developers coming in. I think this is kind of the fruits of Apple's API labor when you think about it. Like, just think back 10 years ago, how hard it was to sync data, right?
Mm-hmm.
Google could do it. Apple could kind of do it. But, if you were like somebody developing an app out of a bedroom, sync was not an option for you. And now it's just an API. You push a couple buttons and it generally works,
Yeah.
And there's a lot of pieces of technology like that have been democratized over the last 10 years. So people with good ideas can make apps with the appropriate infrastructure to be actually pretty good task managers. And as a result, we have a lot of them now. And that's good and bad, right? Because picking one can become daunting because you have a lot of good options, but it's good because you have a lot of good options. So I think one of the things to think about when you're picking a task manager, and I do think it's important to have one. We can talk in a minute about ways to use them, but I think when you're picking one, I like to think of kind of like what are you solving for?
Sure.
Thing. Like, when you look at the iPad, Apple is solving for an all-day battery. That's what they solve for. It's always got about 12 hours of battery life, never more, never less. What is the feature that you're solving for when you pick a task manager? Like if you're somebody who's on the road and you work primarily from your phone, I think the mobile experience is what you're solving for. And there's certain apps that are better than others at that, right?
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. I feel like in addition to there being a lot of good ones, there are a lot of task managers now that are like really built around different priorities that people have. And
Yeah.
And I think that's good. I think it's good that we have options, but I agree it's important to have one. I really can't imagine my life without an application not telling me what to do every day, but a place to put things so they don't get lost.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you on this journey, I've heard from some people and listeners that do all this with paper and pen. Although I just don't feel like that's something achievable for me. I think if you had a pretty simple setup, you could pull that off now. But the apps are really good. And so I think it makes sense. And I want to get into that later, but that's kind of teasing. But the other solve for variables that occur to me. Mobile is one. Like, do you want something that's good on mobile?
Mm-hmm.
Automation is another one. A lot of people like automation attached to their task managers. Depending on how you use a task manager, automation can make a huge difference. So you want one that supports it. Another one, something that's important for me, is linking. I want my task manager to be accessible everywhere. Kind of gets back to this idea of contextual computing. A good task manager should be able to jump to a list from anywhere in your Mac.
Yeah.
And linking is a feature that's important to me. And then there's what I just call advanced features. There's a lot of interesting kind of on the fringe features that various developers have come up with. And then the other one that kind of stands out to me that's an option now that I think a lot of people solve for is what I call system integration. And that's where you don't want your task manager to be just your task manager. You also want it to be your notes app and your calendar. And you want an integrated system where everything is all in one place, which wasn't really possible 5 years ago. But now with things like NotePlan, Obsidian, Notion, there's a lot of ways to get a system integrated task manager. And I don't think any of these variables are wrong, but you should be clear in your mind what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think that's right. Another one that I know we hear from listeners about sometimes is web access, or what is the cross-platform story? Like, hey, I've got an iPhone and a Mac at home, but I use a PC at work. What do I do? And that does complicate some of these. You know, some of these apps are basically everywhere. Some of them have web access. Some of them just don't, right? Some of these, that maybe just rely on iCloud for syncing. It's Apple ecosystem or bust. And so that is another one I think people really sort of contend with, if you can and want an application to maybe have work and personal stuff. I think that's even another factor here. Like, is this something for my entire life? Is this something just for my work day? Is this something for the rest of my life? And those different things really can impact what you end up choosing.
Yeah, another one is collaboration. A lot of people choose one around collaboration because they've got people they work with, and those lists need to be integrated with collaborative work. And all of these are things you should have clear in your mind before you go shopping for a task manager. Because once you know what the important solve for variables are, then the choices become a lot clearer to you. So that's kind of an overview of that element of it. Another thing I wanted to talk about in general was evolving task strategies. For me, they have evolved, and I'm very curious. I haven't really answered my own question here yet, but over the years, my approach to task managers has altered. At one point, it was what I would call a daily driver. It's the thing I'd wake up at and look at, would give me the list for the day, and I'd start marching. And that can make a lot of sense when you're a trial lawyer. I'm not sure how many people it makes sense for, though, because it's very complicated to set up a daily driver. It takes a lot of, automation, and it requires a lot of power in your task manager. And I've come to realize I don't really need that as much anymore. In fact, for me, I've realized that the most important element of productivity is my time blocks. The fact that I spend enough time prepping this show, or something I'm going to make for the Mac Sparky Labs. It's like those content time blocks are what matter. If I don't do those, then things break. Right. But the actual list isn't as important. So my task manager has evolved into what I call now a list of lists more than anything else, right? It's not a daily driver. It doesn't tell me what to do every day. But when I'm in a time block for, Mac Power users, I have a list for Mac Power users, and I will go in there and check. Like, a lot of times there's little admin things we need to do as well, and other things like, confirming with a guest or whatever. And so long as I have the right time blocks and I consult the lists, I'm good. The advantage of that is that I don't feel like I'm beholden to the list so much as now it's just a tool that I go and refer to. And that is very much less stressful. But there are people listening to this show that need a daily driver. I would argue that it's not as many that think I don't think as many people need it as people think that they need it. You know what I mean? And one of the things I would like you to consider if you're thinking about task management is, what is the role of this thing for you? Is it your boss, or is it an assistant that gives you a list of things to do when you say, now I'm working on X, keep a list of everything I need to do when I work on X so I can see that now. And I wish I was still practicing law for the purpose of an experiment of, could I do a list of lists as a lawyer? I don't know. I think I probably could, honestly, if I set the blocks right. But I do find that the new way I deal with tasks has evolved over the last 2 or 3 years to be more soft. It's not as taxing on me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think something you said really kind of caught my ear, of the relationship between your tasks and your calendar. And, you do time blocking, but I think that's always a point of friction for people. I mean, even for someone like me, and I also use my task manager as sort of a list of lists. Sometimes it's like, well, this is fuzzy between a task and an event, or a task and a note. And that's where some of these applications, like say Apple's reminders, in Sequoia and iOS 18, you can have your tasks show up on your calendar at the time that they're due. And for some people, that may really sort of solve that friction point. A lot of other apps will bring in your calendar and show it to you, like in the Today view in your tasks. So you can see your tasks, but up at the top or the bottom, you also have your events. Maybe they're read only, but you can kind of see where things are. And I think people's needs around these things can change over time, like yours have.
Yeah.
But it is worth some consideration of like what I'm doing, what makes sense as a task and what makes sense as a block of time. And your example is the same as mine, of like show preparation or content preparation. That gets blocked down the schedule because I know, like, I'm going to spend an hour and a half doing connected or MPU prep, right? I'm going to spend an hour writing this column, whatever it may be. And if it's just a task for me, sometimes that doesn't give me the full picture of like what my day may be, because if it's just a single line in my list for the day, it was like, well, gosh, that's a big chunk of time. How does that interact with everything else? And these are all things that need to be taken into account.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole here, but it does change the way you work with a task manager. Like for me, at the beginning of the week, I set blocks for the week, which to me are key, right? I need to do those. But then when I go through the lists in my task manager, I don't say, oh gosh, this had 20 items on it. I only did 10 today. I don't care. I just did as much as that block afforded me. And if I notice that like that part of my life isn't getting enough things done, then maybe I'll make bigger blocks for it. But I don't end the day saying, I had X number of tasks and I only did Y, it's more fluid than that. And that's why I kind of consider it a list of lists. But this is something you should all be thinking about as you're picking tools again, because the daily driver that's a very demanding task manager that, you need something that has good automation and notifications and a lot of different things. Whereas the list of lists gives you a lot more options. I mean, technically, really, a list of lists you could get by with a yellow pad and a pen if you wanted. So think about all those things as you go into it. Like another one is collaboration. We've already mentioned it, but maybe your task management strategy is, no, I work with a team. My whole point of my task manager is for me to see what everybody else is doing. Well, that's going to send you down a different rabbit hole as well.
Yeah.
So my advice is think about your solve for variables, think about kind of your philosophy about it, and then start looking at your options.
This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by Squarespace. Over the holiday break, I had an email from an organization here in town. I built their website years and years ago on Squarespace, and they wanted to add some new features. And it was honestly really easy because Squarespace has all these tools that are designed to work together. And that means it's all in one. It's the all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. All-in-one means all of these tools are there together. So whether you're collecting payments, or maybe you're selling content or goods, or digital goods, whatever it is, Squarespace has all the tools you need. So let's talk about those payments. Onboarding is fast and simple. You can get started with just a few clicks and start receiving payments right away. Plus, you give your customers more ways to pay by choosing from popular payment methods like Klarna, Direct Debit, Apple Pay, Afterpay, and ClearPay, depending on where you're located. And you can keep track of your website traffic with analytics. They're built in and they measure your end-to-end online performance. You get insights on top traffic sources, understand how your reach is growing, track sales metrics, and learn where to focus new engagement. It's all the data you need to scale your brand or business. Again, fully integrated, built in, and it's really easy to understand what's going on. And if you have a video library you need to put together, gone are the days of like embedding video from somewhere else. No. You just upload it to Squarespace. You can build these beautiful video pages, and you can sell access to your video library by adding a paywall to your content. So if you got a new site to build or an old site that needs refreshing, head on over to squarespace.com/MPU and you will save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. That's squarespace.com/MPU to get 10% off your first purchase and to show your support for the show. Our thanks to Squarespace for the support of Mac Power users and all of Relay.
So, like I said earlier, both of us have been doing a lot of testing. And I took on this testing with an eye to moving. I've been using OmniFocus for 15 years. I've been using the same app for 15 years. Like I'm thinking, well, all of these have changed. My philosophy towards task management has changed. And I really do feel that almost every option we discuss here is a viable option.
Yeah.
Maybe it's time for me to switch things up a bit. And so about July, I started playing with a lot. It started with me with the betas, and I spent a bunch of time in Apple Reminders. And man, there's a lot to like about Apple Reminders. I feel like, and we've talked about this a few times on the show, but Apple has improved the game. I feel like they're gobbling up all the oxygen for the mid-tier task managers in terms of native apps. And because it does a lot of stuff good, and it does some stuff better than other applications.
Yeah, Apple has really continued to focus on reminders. And I mean, it wasn't that long ago where it had that goofy like index card sort of UI and wasn't all that powerful, but it has really turned into something I think really special. And it is a really good example, I think, just like Apple Notes of like, yeah, there are more high-end professional tools out there that give you more options or have a different focus. But Reminders is aiming for like the middle part of the market, right? The sort of average iPhone and Mac user. And I think they've done a really good job with that. And I think in particular, this year, wasn't the biggest year for Reminders, but just like Apple Notes, so it has big years and it has years which is kind of like refinements. And I think that they've continued to push the ball forward really at a pretty good pace. And there are still some things that I in particular, I'm going to talk about Reminders a bit later on in the show, but there are some things I'd like to see them improve. But I think the pluses, the benefits of it really are strong.
Yeah, and I'll tell you. So what I did with is I wrote an Apple script to just export all of my tasks out of OmniFocus and put them into Reminders lists. So I recreated a list of lists. The things that stood out to me was simple sharing. Like I've always shared some reminders with my wife and some of my family members and a couple other lists that are shared. So it has always served that role for me. But it just reminded me, wouldn't it be nice if all my lists were this shareable?
Yeah.
Where I could just like, what if I just had a Mac Power Users list and just shared it with Steven and we just both had it, And that is something I guess we should probably discuss at some point offline. But that was really impressive to me. And I think their Kanban view is really impressive that they included that, where you can set columns and within a task list set up basically Kanban lists where you've got columns of statuses or whatever index you want to use. and you can visually move them around. If anything had kept me in reminders, it would have been that Kanban view, because it still calls to me like a siren. You know, I mean, it looks good on your screen. You know, it's great. And we're going to talk more about reminders because you're more involved with it than I am at this point. But the other thing that stood out with me was Siri Capture. I mean, it's just so good to get it to a specific list with just your voice. Capture other ways is not as simple as some other apps, but capture with your voice, I don't think anything can hold a candle to it at this point.
Yeah, I don't either. And while Reminders is obviously an Apple product, doesn't have a Windows application. You can have web access at iCloud.com. So if you are on a PC and you need to get to your list, it does offer that, which is a real bonus for some people.
I also spent some time in Things, and Things I think remains the Goldilocks of task apps. It's really looks great. I mean, you always have to say that when you talk about Things. It is still, I think, slightly better than Reminders, but Reminders is creeping up on it. And it still is not as powerful as OmniFocus, but it looks prettier. And if you can work within kind of the Things system, I think it's an excellent solution. People always think I don't like Things. I think it's great. Yeah. It's just, for me, the variables I'm solving for, it doesn't really fit, but it's a great app. And my big question was, does Reminders overrun it at this point? And it doesn't, because like the way they use that today list, and I mean, there's some definite development on things that Reminders has not caught up with, and I'm not sure ever will. And their mobile app is aces. I mean, it's a great looking mobile app.
It's really good. They've got a Vision Pro version, if that's your jam too. One, I think, knock against Things is that it's just their business model. Each app is separate. They don't have universal purchases. So if you need the Mac, iPad, and iPhone version, you're in for like $80. So just like, there's a trial on the Mac, but it is a bit pricey. But it is really beautiful. And I think the Things system, while it doesn't work for me for some very specific reasons, it is really good for a lot of people. They have this whole sort of idea around like your day and your evening, which I find really compelling, especially if you're using one app for, work and home things. Not many other apps that I have tried sort of have that idea of like, this is due today, but not until the evening, right? Not until I'm home. And I think that's really compelling. They also have the kind of two categories of task, anytime and someday, which you can do in some other applications, but I think Things does it best. These are tasks that I just, I want to get out of my brain, and I will deal with them at some point in the future. And if I've got some free time, I could go into my anytime list. I'm like, oh yeah, I can do this at any point. Or someday is sort of for longer view things, like, a task or a project that I want to get to, but maybe isn't important and doesn't have a time frame. It lets you sort of categorize those in different ways than your day-to-day tasks. And I think that's useful. Like going through my lists, very often I will have tasks sort of at the bottom that are undated, that are sort of someday tasks. Like, yes, it would be good to do this at some point, but because they're at the bottom of the list and they don't have a date associated with them, it's easy to get lost. And with Things, you can have a place for those and review them easily and make sure that they're not being forgotten. I really like that, honestly.
Yeah. One risk with digital task managers is that it becomes like that room at the end of Indiana Jones for your tasks, right? It's just a bunch of crates as far as the eye can see, and you don't know what's important to you. And any app that can help you surface those things and keep aware of them and look through the crates once in a while is a good thing. But also, I think that's a mistake to have that room. A task manager, just because it can hold a million things doesn't mean you should put a million things in it.
Sure.
And that is that's important no matter which tool you pick.
Yeah.
The next category of my tour was this integrated systems. We did that show on NotePlan several months ago, and with Dave, and I am super tempted. I love so much about NotePlan. I like the way the model works. I like the way every month the developer releases a new feature. Like he spends every month just making a new feature, and then it comes out and it works and there's no problems. I like so much about NotePlan, and I know a bunch of listeners switched over to it afterwards because I hear about it. Same thing in the MacSparky Labs. We did a meetup, and I had 2 NotePlan users in there that were so happy with it. Like they put it in, and because it is again, to use the term Goldilocks, it's right there. It's a native Mac app with powers similar to, but not as powerful as Obsidian. And you can have your notes, you can have your calendar, you can have your tasks all in one integrated system. You don't have to jump around apps. There's so much about that appeals to me. And so I spent a lot of December. I moved a bunch of data in there, and I really thought about just moving everything into NotePlan and just making that my thing. But it didn't quite make the cut for me for a couple of reasons. For me, a lot of the reason is because of my collaboration in Notion. Mm-hmm. So I have someone that works with me, and everything I produce goes through a Notion database that is very collaborative. That's the reason people use Notion.
Yeah.
The idea of duplicating stuff in NotePlan and Notion to me seems fraught with peril, Mm-hmm. I mean, because the active notes on projects I ship are in Notion. So duplicating it in NotePlan just seemed to me like I would have inconsistent data. And it's good at that. Although it's good with all that integration stuff, it's not as good of a task manager as the task manager I picked. It's not really quite as good of a note app, although maybe you could argue that it is as good as the notes apps I'm using. It's just a little bit less of everything, but you get a huge boon from having it all in one place. And, I haven't given up on this app. I'm still keeping a data set in there and playing with it. And like every month as they add new features, I'm keeping up with it. So I'm not saying I'll never switch to NotePlan, but at this point, at least, I will not switch to NotePlan. But yeah. It was tempting. I know there was a thread on this in the forums, so people were asking if I had picked one. Yeah, I just I don't think it's the end all be all for me yet, and that's just kind of where it is at this point in time. Obsidian is a more powerful one. I made a field guide on it. The Obsidian Task plugin has got even better. Now there's 2 people working on it. They don't have a monetization plan. It's just kind of they want you to just give them money, but it honestly rivals OmniFocus in terms of power. It is really impressive. But again, the thing with these integrated systems is because I already have another integrated system that JF works in. Having 2 of them, I've found through experience is just going to make me crazy.
Sure.
Like if I was just working alone, there's a very good chance now I would be at 100% in Obsidian or NotePlan and not using the other stuff. But because I work with other people, that kind of pushed me out.
Yeah. Yeah, man. And it's a little frustrating to me that collaboration and task managers like Things, for instance, no collaboration. Reminders is pretty good. But for some of these apps that are task focused, collaboration is a secondary feature, if a feature at all. And so you may not want the complexity or sort of the all-in-one aspects of something like Notion or Obsidian, but you may be driven there because of collaboration. And that's something that I would like to see all of these apps take more seriously. Like I'm a list of lists apps, but having real, like, polished, well-working collaboration where I don't have to turn to a more complex app is, I think there's room for that in the market still.
Yeah, agreed. But speaking of the market, there's a whole new category of these apps. I'm just going to call them web-based task calendar integrators because there's like I was going to make a list for the show, but there's so many of them,
Yeah.
and they're all really expensive, and I really can't recommend any of them. When I was talking earlier about how my task management really starts with the blocks of time, which drives into the task manager for the lists. A lot of people are doing this now. It's a really great way to run this. So they're making web services that do this for you, and it's a calendar with your tasks built right in. And often, like the quote unquote killer feature is the ability to drag items off your list onto your calendar. But I've been able to do that forever with OmniFocus. You just drag a task onto the calendar, and it creates an event. I think Reminders does it too. I know it does. Reminders does it into Fantastical. I haven't checked in the native calendar app, but it probably does. They just added a feature that if you have a reminder with a time on it, it automatically shows up in the calendar. So these are features that have kind of been floating around for native apps for a long time. And I just found the testing I did in those was that they are very tedious to capture things in. Metadata management is too many clicks. It's kind of a new kind of frontier of apps, and I don't feel like any of them are refined enough to justify my use. And they are, like I said, all kind of expensive for what they do.
And I think a lot of them too sort of stray into project management territory. Where it's like they have a lot of features for teams or for collaboration, like beyond what most of us need if we're just working with a couple of other people. I think there's a whole category of those as well. And I think it's interesting to have this sort of web-based, web-first approach. And it certainly works for some people. But I think those of us who are really in tune with the Apple ecosystem, like we want our native apps, right? We want an app that sits in the dock or works really well on the iPad or has a watchOS version. And a lot of web tools just aren't there. And I think a lot of people like us kind of write off that whole category because, it's just like a tab in Safari. Like that's not enough. That's not what I want to interact with every day.
Well, I actually went at it enthusiastically because, I get the connection between the calendar and the task list. That is, to me, magical if you do it right. So I understood what they were aiming for. And like I said, it was this whole new kind of like category of apps. So being a nerd, I was like, I bet these guys are thinking out of the box and they've probably come up with some ideas I've never seen before. But they really haven't, at least in my experience. And the one feature a lot of them brag about is AI. I want to just talk about that real quick. AI and task management to me don't combine. I mean, as much as I am a fan of these large language models and looking for ways to use them, I mean, if you're in the labs, I'm doing like at least a video a month on AI in one direction or another lately because I think it's so interesting and developing. But what I don't need AI to do is tell me what tasks to do today or how to spend my time. Like that's exclusively in the domain of my brain. And I don't know that I will ever be okay with, my robot overlord telling me what I work on today. But that's a big feature that's showing up in all these web-based systems. It's like, give me all your tasks, give me all your calendar events, and I will tell you how you should run your day. I'll plan it for you. That is, while that sounds easy, I don't think it's right. And I don't think you're going to get the most out of your day if you do that.
Yeah, I don't want AI telling me what to do either. Like I have all the context for my day and I get it wrong sometimes. Like I don't need a system that does not have that context to manage things for me.
One other option I looked at, and this was started out just because of Apple Reminders and their Kanban features. I started looking at Kanban tools again in general and saying, could I run my whole system on a Kanban, like a series of Kanban boards? And that actually was one of the more successful experiments for me, right? So you just set up a Kanban for every area of your life, and then you set up Kanban cards for every existing project with categories like waiting, on hold, active, whatever your categories are, and you just move the cards around. So then when you go into an area of your life, you look at the Kanban for that area, and you just have a visual list of cards that you can move around. And of all of them in this recent round of testing, that was the one that nearly got me to bite. I mean, it was so different than what I've done with lists in the past that that's very kind of sexy. And I didn't know if that hadn't needed time to wear off and I would get bored with it. But it also wasn't so good for the administrative stuff. And I have a lot of administrative stuff in my life. And the other thing, we're talking about solve for variables. Automation and quick capture are two very important variables to me. And I didn't find any Kanban software that had good automation or good quick capture. So it felt real tedious to set things up in it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the Achilles heel for me. But that's another place I could see myself going in the future, like a really well-built Kanban board. I mean, so much so that I'm bugging some of my favorite developers that make task managers now. Hey, man.
Yeah, I think Trello is like the example for most people. And I use Trello for a couple of specific things. We have some for Relay, just kind of like keeping up with goals over the year and that sort of thing. And I've used them in the past with Mary for a couple of like just family projects. She really likes them. So our trip to London, we had a Trello board of like things we want to do, things we've booked. And then eventually we had columns for each day that we were there. It's like, okay, like today we're going to go to this museum and go see this, and we're going to eat at this place. And it was kind of a way to manage that. And I think it works really well for those sorts of things for me. But anytime I've tried to like move task management into a board like this, it is the administrative stuff. It's the repeating stuff that these systems just don't seem tuned for. But I think there are types of projects or organizational things that they really excel at for me. And so I kind of view these as not task managers, but maybe project managers or ways to organize things kind of visually. And they can kind of live alongside my tasks, kind of where I've landed over the years with it.
Yeah, I mean, but if you look at Trello, because I re-upped my account just because of this experiment, and they are creeping toward task manager friendly systems.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, the Apple Reminders is creeping towards Trello with its own Kanban system.
Yeah,
I mean, there is movement here where I think in the future, if we do the show 5 years from now, I think most tools will probably have some sort of Kanban option to them, which to me, really, I'm a visual thinker. I've said this before. I love seeing it visually presented to me. It makes it really easy for me to make decisions and move things around. And I think this is something that we're going to see more of. Okay, but I'm not the only one that's been on a journey.
You have
what
not.
About you?
Yeah, so every fall, I take my tasks out of Todoist, which is what I've used for years and years, and put them in reminders because I want to give it a fair shake every year. And again, like we said earlier, basically every year it gets something in terms of features. And I will say, I never make it to the end of the year still being in reminders, but I'm still in it. I'm still using it.
Yeah.
And it is not perfect, but it is something that I have landed on. I'll talk a bit more about my pros and cons in a minute. But Todoist is where I've been for a long time. It's a list of lists. It has really nice natural language processing, which is very high on my list of priorities. Like I want to be able to enter things quickly, make sure they're filed away the right way. I don't want to do a lot of manual clicking and dragging. And Todoist is great for that sort of fast input. Another one that I have tried on and off, and I spent some time with it this year as well, is TickTick, Tick. And it is kind of like Todoist in terms of like it can be a simple list of lists, but you can also use TickTick to pull in and manage your calendar, and you can kind of set tasks on your calendar like Apple can do now natively. And it's pretty good. I've got some complaints about the Mac app. The Mac app is clearly not the most important version of it to them. But like Todoist, it is cross-platform. So you get it on iOS and you get it on Android and you get it on Windows. And so if you need something that's everywhere, TickTick is one of the few that can do that. And like I said, it's pretty good. I think it could easily be my daily task manager if it needed to be. It also does some fun stuff with theming, which some of these apps do, some of them do none of. But if that's important to you, like I want my task manager to be this way or set these colors, you can do that. And it has really nice collaboration. So you can assign tasks, share a list. It's pretty great. Their collaboration stuff is really good.
I had an account with TickTick for 2 months, and my takeaway was that it largely got gobbled up by Reminders improvements.
I think it did, yeah.
However, if you like the Reminders feature set, but for whatever reason the Reminders app rubs you wrong, this is a great option to that. It's not as expensive as some of these other apps we've been talking about, so you can get into it, relatively cheap. I forget, it was like $5 a month or something for the subscription, something like that. And I guess that adds up when you think about it. But yeah, it feels to me like apps like this are going to really struggle as Reminders get stronger, because it's like, why are you going to pay for it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the front of the line for that sort of complexity in their future business model may be GoodTasks. GoodTask is built on top of the Apple Reminders and Calendars databases. So GoodTask is not a separate sync system like TickTick or Todoist or OmniFocus. It is your Reminders database.
Yeah.
And basically, it's sort of like Reminders for power users. Lots of customization, lots of different ways you can view your data. Again, you can combine calendars and tasks really easily. But I think the most clever thing in GoodTask is the quick actions. And so these are automations you build in the app and you can trigger at any point. And so some of them may be around due dates. Like I have a task that's due today, but I need to move it 2 days down the road. You can set up a quick action and just tap a button and it do that automatically. You can change what list it's in automatically. The quick actions is really, really cool. And I think it's a very approachable way to do automation in an app like this. It's basically just drag and drop, and you have some menus you can choose things from, and you can organize them the way you want, and they sync across all your platforms, which is also nice. But I think as Reminders gets more powerful, the ground is kind of slowly shrinking under GoodTask's feet. And I have had some pretty rough sync issues with GoodTask. And maybe it's because I've used it, on and off over the years, but I'll set everything up and it'll sync and the order of my list will be different. It's like, what are we doing? This should be a solved problem. And so it's not perfect, but if you really want something that uses reminders, so you can talk to Siri and do all the reminders things, those changes get reflected in GoodTask. But if you want a more powerful view into it, it's a good option. And I know a lot of people really love GoodTask. It just hasn't been a huge hit for me. And I do wonder, again, kind of long term, where they can go. But it's a really good alternative to Apple Reminders, kind of a superset on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a category of apps that add on to the built-in apps, and this is one of the better ones.
Yeah.
Anything else in your tour of task managers?
There's a relative newcomer to this. It's just called Tasks, which makes it basically impossible to find in the App Store. But it uses iCloud to sync. It's available across all the Apple platforms, and it's not perfect. In fact, it does a lot of things that I really just kind of find a little bit confusing. And I think the Mac app, again, is sort of the weakest of the clients, but its general idea is that a task can have multiple, I guess it can be, it's not binary. So it's not to do or done. It has this whole middle part of the flow where this is a task that is being worked on right now, but it's not finished. And that doesn't really work with the way that I work. But if it does, if you do want that sort of intermediate step, kind of like some Kanban stuff where it's like I can move things between columns. Task has a lot of that built in. Again, built on iCloud syncing. I believe it has sign in with Apple, so it's like you can have like a private account. And it is a relative newcomer, but it is it's pretty interesting. Some of the ideas in this app.
You also, in the notes, Stephen, have talked about an analog tool.
Yeah, this is something that I've been sort of experimenting with a little bit over the last year, is to take, look at my task list for the day and just kind of actually handwrite at the top of the page of my field notes for the day, like the top 3. And that may be like, a big thing, like prep for MPU, like, read the ads, do the CMS stuff, whatever it may be. But I found it to be a way to just like kind of highlight, like at the end of the day, these 2 or 3 things they've got to get done. They're the high level bit for the day. It has not been as impactful as I kind of thought it may be, but at the same time, it is kind of nice to have it written out, and like it feels nice to like draw a line through it at the end of the day. Like, okay, I got these big things done. It is in no way replacing my digital task management. Like my task management is fully in the digital realm. I'm going to keep it that way. That works really well for me. But sort of extracting the most important things and writing them down can be really useful, especially on a hectic day where there may be a lot of things going on, and it may be kind of easy to lose track of what's important. It can be a useful thing just to have it written out somewhere.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by 1Password. Go to onepassword.com/MPU to get 20% off your plan. 1Password is so much more than a password manager. It's protection for all, from enterprises to individuals across the internet. It's a company exclusively dedicated to protecting its customers from all of the evils across the internet, and there's a lot of them. 1Password's been around a long time. They've got a reputation for fast, reliable, and transparent customer support, and they're the most enterprise password manager, rated best password manager by Wired Magazine. Whether you're an international conglomerate or just a guy with a Mac, 1Password has a plan for you to protect your passwords with a secure password manager that allows you to store sensitive information, not just passwords, with access to it anywhere. And they make it really easy to share password and credentials securely, so you've got no problem there as well. It also tracks and addresses security risks you may not even be aware of. With their new extended access management, you can secure every identity, device, and app with the future of access management to secure your workforce, secure your devices, and secure your apps. Over the years, we've watched 1Password grow into the behemoth of security that it is. But don't forget, they started out by making an app to protect yourself with your Mac, and they still do an excellent job of that. No matter what device you've got on the Apple platforms, 1Password has an app for you to protect you and your family. I've got a family plan. I've had it for years. I renew it every year, and we use it to keep ourselves safe on the internet. Why don't you do the same? Go to onepassword.com/MPU today and get 20% off.
Okay, David, so you talked a little bit about what you're using, but what does your system look like these days?
Okay, so after all of this fretting and touring, I'm still using OmniFocus, which I think to a lot of listeners is no surprise, but to me it is. Honestly, I had started this journey thinking I'm going to find something new and it's going to be awesome. Noteplan and Kanbans very nearly hooked me. But the friction points in it was some of my software variables. Like one of the things I try to do is keep email under control, but I get a lot of it. And like when somebody sends me a customer service request, for me to capture that into OmniFocus is one key press, just one key. You know what I mean? It's just so easy to capture it. And OmniFocus has just nailed capture so hard. And so whether I'm capturing a link for something I want to write about or an email or whatever, it just does such a good job at that. I was just shocked and amazed that still some of the really powerful OmniFocus features, like the ability to review projects and have defer dates on tasks, don't show up in these other apps. It's just, I mean, this is not a secret, guys. How come nobody's copied that? So there was just, power there. Now I pay $100 a year to the Omni Group for my subscription to this app, which is not chicken feed, but since I'm paying it, I might as well use it. And honestly, I think it's worth the money to me because it takes all the friction out of my day. And granted, I'm a power user of this app. I've made field guides on it. I've been using it since before it was an app. So yeah. I know it very well. But honestly, I felt like I confidently mastered the other apps too pretty quickly. It's not that hard. But just given kind of my overall situation, it still makes the most sense. Some other things that stand out for OmniFocus for me, in addition to capture and automation, is the active development. The Omni Group seems to have really put the pedal down, with the total conversion to Swift UI means it was like one of the very first task managers that showed up on Vision Pro. I mean, Reminders still hasn't, go figure. And they're doing just this regular cadence of updates. The other thing is, bringing Sal Segoyan onto the team, who was at Apple, and now he's doing all the automation for the Omni Group. I mean, it just means that the automation story is really good. There's just a bunch of stuff going on. And I think another big factor in me deciding to stay with it was the other tool sets that I'm using, particularly Notion. I made reference to it earlier, but projects for me live in Notion. They used to live in Obsidian. So when I say, we just started a book club in the MacSparky Labs, right? So I've got a project to run a webinar on this book once everybody reads it. So that is a record in our shared Notion database. JF knows what his job is. I know what my job is. The Zoom links are there. All the stuff we need to do it. In the old days when, I was just running everything out of Obsidian, I could see myself just, putting the tasks in that same note with all that information. But that's not what I'm doing now because I've got another person who needs to see all this stuff and Obsidian doesn't collaborate. So another option is I could have moved all the task management into the Notion project here. But there's not that much to that. And I will add some project-specific notes and tasks in Notion, but I really don't do much of that. But it's just not that good. I tried at one point. I guess I should have mentioned. I also put all my tasks into Notion. And it's just not, I know a lot of people build their whole life system in Notion. And it's just kind of, I just didn't find it at all appealing. Like capture is difficult. All the variables I'm solving for, it's bad at. You can't link an email in Notion. There's just a bunch of hard stops for me where that doesn't work. But you know what OmniFocus has? It has linking. So I can embed OmniFocus links in anything, including Notion documents. And that allows it to be just kind of my go-to task manager. No matter where I'm in, I can get to it. It's a native app. It has easy capture. It's got great, support from the developer. And all of that kind of combined to me making the decision to stay with OmniFocus. And so my main system is OmniFocus. I've got some stuff over in Notion, but most of that is just linking back to OmniFocus. And then there's an analog component too as well. But let me just kind of answer any questions you have on the digital side first.
Yeah, I guess my biggest question between OmniFocus and Notion, right? I would imagine there are tasks that kind of fall in between. Like it's collaborative, but it's solely on you. Like, how do you know, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, how do you know what system something should go in?
Well, for me, it generally goes in. If it's a task type item, it goes into OmniFocus. Now, because I work on blocks, like I'll have a block dedicated to making a video for the labs. Now, I have a Notion record for that. There is no task in OmniFocus for it at all. But every Tuesday from 12 to 4, I make 2 videos for the labs for the next week. And all of that is run out of a shared Notion document, and I do what needs to get done on that. Now, maybe I'll get to the end of it and say, I need JF to research one thing about this and add this to the description. I will put that in Notion with a flag to him, but I won't track it. I trust the guy. He just does what I ask him to do. We have a great relationship, so it doesn't need to be that fancy. Make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. This is something that I have kind of over the years, I work with a lot of people, both on podcasts and running Relay and now Underscore. Like a lot of my work is collaborative, but I have never been other than my wife and a couple of lists, I've never had a collaborative task place. And a lot of that stems that from the early days of Relay, neither Mike nor I wanted that. We can talk, but it's up to us to kind of keep up with our tasks the way we want to and manage them. And over time that's worked well, but we got to have the communication, right? The collaboration is not happening in the task app level. It's happening in Slack or email or something. And then we kind of manage it ourselves. And so I've basically inherited that across my podcasts and my work with David Smith. Like, we're going to talk about what we need to do, but it's kind of up to each of us to manage that. And that's how I prefer to do things. Like, I don't want a shared task list with anybody else really other than my spouse. But a lot of people do. And I think Notion and Obsidian to a lesser degree are really interesting examples of it because they do so many other things. You can have tasks sort of like scattered across a bunch of different places in a bunch of different ways. And I think that's really interesting if you are moving a lot of stuff into those tools to have your tasks alongside make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I really haven't found that all that necessary. Like, to use the earlier example, if I'm going to make a labs video about AI, like, I've already done the research. My notes are in the note. I create an outline in the note. I record it. I do the rough edit, and then I send it off to JF, and I change the status in Notion, and I never think about it again because his job is to finish the edit, add the heads and the tails, export it, put it on the website, and do all that stuff. So there's just not much of a need for it. And I like that, honestly, like you. Another thing we do, which is somewhat task related, is we have a weekly meeting, like a phone meeting. And we have started recently where we have a database in Notion for every week. We have a record. And as I go through the week, if I think of something I want to talk to him about, I put it on the list. So we can both look kind of at the list of things to be discussed before we get on the call. And so that works for us. I know there are people listening out here that collaborate to a much higher level, and they need something much more integrated and much more that carries more kind of accountability. Mm-hmm. But it is the lack of formality in the Notion stuff that allows me to keep OmniFocus. JF also uses OmniFocus. I've never seen his list. He's never seen mine. Yeah, we do it independently. That OmniFocus was such a Swiss Army knife in terms of linkability, automation, and all that stuff. That if I'm going to use a free agent style task manager as opposed to an integrated system, I still feel it's the best one. Yeah. And while reminders could have worked, and a lot of basically everything I talked about earlier in the show, I could have made work if OmniFocus disappeared from the earth. But OmniFocus to me hits my variable list better than any of them do. So use that, Yeah.
Are you primarily using these tools at the Mac?
Yeah. Yeah. Most of my work gets done at the Mac.
Yeah. Same.
I do occasionally work out of Notion in the phone. Interestingly, because of the holidays and whatnot, I wrote most of the outline for the show on my phone. I'd never done that for a podcast before, but I did. But there's also an analog component to it. I've mentioned before. Analog Ugmonk makes these great cards. They weekly cards and daily cards. For several years, I've been using the daily cards and the weekly cards. However, this past year, I fell in love with Plotter Stationery, which is a Ring notebook system. Mm-hmm. It really solved a journaling problem for me, the analog piece of it. I always wanted to analog journal, but I hated these books where everything's glued together. I want to move the pages around. And with this system, you can do it. And I like the paper, and it's finicky, over designed an overpriced Japanese stationery, which is exactly the kind of thing that gets me going.
Yeah.
Right. So of course I bought it. But what I've done is for the last 3 months since October is rather than use the Ugmonk daily cards, I've just been at the beginning of the week creating a single page for each day. And I've got my plotter binder on my desk. So if I want to put just down something I want to do on a certain day, I'll just go to that day and write it at the top. And I have a little system where I can designate time commitments, block commitments, or task commitments, but I don't need to get into all the details now. But yeah, I have a little bit of a system. So how does this work with a digital system? To me, the analog is the last mile. That's the thing that I actually pay attention to as I work through the day. OmniFocus is the master database of things I could do, the master list of lists. But when I'm planning the day out, I will go and find things in OmniFocus and I'll check them off and write them down on the page. And over the course of the day, I'll get them done. And if I don't get them done, then I've got to put them back into OmniFocus or move them to another day. And this is the piece of this I do that the least number of people are interested in. Like when I talk about this in the labs, almost nobody does that. They all just work out of whatever their task manager is. But
Yeah.
I find it only takes a couple minutes, to your point earlier with your experiment. It just really takes minutes to it. But for me, in my head at least, when I take it out of the digital realm of ones and zeros and I put it in pencil lead on my page, it becomes real. If that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It more kind of manifests as something I'm actually going to do. I mean, one of the problems I was noticing a couple of years ago is there was so much stuff in OmniFocus that it became almost like inconceivable to me that any of it mattered, right? It was just so much stuff, right? Whereas now it's like, no, I've got great, perspectives that surface stuff that's important. I've got this new block system I use. But I always take a few things out of it and I write them down for the day. And that also forces me to be realistic about the time I spend. How much time do I have? How many of these things can I actually write down? It just takes a few minutes. I usually do it the night before. And that is an essential part of my task system because ultimately I'm looking at the top of the page as I go through the day. I'm not looking at an OmniFocus list.
I have been also experimenting with some analog stuff. But I got to tell you, every time you talk about the plotter system, and I have a Pen Addict review of the whole thing in the show notes as well. So if you're not familiar with this, like scroll through this Pen Addict post. But every time I see this, I'm like, oh, this is so awesome. Like the idea that I could like completely customize a notebook with the pages and even the cover, like and the size, all really interesting and tempting to me.
The movable pages are what really, of course that was what I needed because like I'll write down thoughts about something I read in a book and then I'll have my plan for the day. And then I use the analog side to kind of give my brain another playground, if that makes sense, because I do so much stuff in digital. I do find that analog sometimes brings out ideas and thoughts that I wouldn't have otherwise. But when I was using a notebook where the pages were glued together, it would make me nuts because trying to find stuff was really hard. And with this, you just open the binder and you put another page in. It's very easy.
Yeah.
And it's a well-done system. To make you even further tempted, I've now expanded my plotter collection. I bought it's called the A5 Mini. It's the wallet size.
Yeah.
So I've got, rather than your field notes, I've got a little 5-ring binder in my pocket with really tiny pieces of paper. But we've been spending a lot of time with doctors lately. It's complicated, but I've got a bunch of notes in here I've been taking in doctors' offices and things. And it's like, and it has a wallet insert. So all my cards and stuff are in there too. It's my new wallet. I love it. So, Stephen, maybe before the year's over, we'll get you converted.
So it sounds like overall you're pretty happy with where things are.
Yeah, I am. There's a part of me, like I said, that really likes the integrated system approach, where you look at a tool like Obsidian or Obsidian or Noteplan, To me, Notion is not an option for integration because it's not native enough of a Mac app to make it worth it. But OmniFocus is kind of the lingua franca. It jumps across any app I want with its very powerful linking. And will I still be using OmniFocus in 15 years? I don't know. Well, even, who knows, right? But for now, it seems like the right call for me. But I do miss the Kanban boards. I'm looking at ways to integrate that in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be cool. And it does kind of seem up OmniFocus's alley, like to give you more views into your data, right? That's what Perspectives all are about. I love the Today view in OmniFocus. Honestly, I wish more task managers would adopt that sort of thing. I think that's always been, for when I was in OmniFocus for years, that's how I interacted with it most of the time, was the Today view. And it's like, it's just right there. It's like, I really hope that they do that. And it sounds like if they do, you'll be very excited.
Yeah. And I just, in general, I'm very happy with their switch to Swift UI because it tells me that I've got future, it's kind of future proof in that sense. Like they're one of the leaders down what Apple says is the future. So whatever Apple does, OmniFocus will be there for them. One thing I'm thinking about doing as an experiment is I've got a big glass board in the studio, and I think I'm going to get some sticky pads and make a analog Kanban over there.
There you go.
Where I can just put a sticky for each project. But my first test at it failed because the stickies wouldn't stay stuck. I guess gotta get. I got some very pretty ones that were nice colors, but maybe I just have to get the ugly yellow ones with better glue. I don't know, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm still kind of reaching a bit to get kind of this set up just the way I want it. But the question of am I satisfied? Yes, I am. I mean, I feel like I've looked at everything and I'm not with OmniFocus because of momentum. I'm there because of choice.
That's great. That's really good.
How about you?
So I am in Reminders. Like I said, it has stuck for me since the OS releases this fall. And I'm not 100% sold on it. There are still some things that I wish Reminders was better at. But I feel like Reminders' strengths really go a long way. A lot of these we mentioned earlier, great support with Siri. If you've used Todoist, you will know that to talk to Siri to get it to put something in Todoist is very difficult because the word Todoist is hard for Siri, and the company and some of its users disagree on how to pronounce the name of the product. So that can be really frustrating. But another great thing about Reminders is its shortcut support. And this has been a bit of a friction point for Todoist. They had some shortcut support, and they've actually scaled it back. They had some things that they've pulled out of shortcuts, and I'm not quite sure what the future of that is. I hope they fully embrace automation through shortcuts again, but that's been a challenge for some users. And Apple's not always the best at supporting their own apps in shortcuts. Like there's some things that, like Safari, for instance, right? Safari has some like really interesting shortcut support, but then some other like basic stuff just isn't there. Like, what are you doing? Yeah. But the Reminders team has done a good job with that, and that's great. Another great part of it is that collaboration. So when I was using Todoist, my wife was also using Todoist, and we for years have had two shared lists. We have one called Hackets, which is just like stuff either around the house or in the family that either of us can do, but we need to be aware of, right? So sign the kids, permission slip for the field trip, or, just today it was like drop off a package at the UPS store, a return. Either one of us can do it. We're both aware of it. And being on a shared list means if one of us does it, the other one is aware, right? But the second one has always been a grocery list, shopping list. And my word, Reminders auto sorting of grocery store items is so good. I'm actually going to have a link to a support article about it, because if you have not played with this, it is really, really great. So you put in your or the item that you need from the grocery store. So milk, eggs, tomatoes, whatever it may be. and it auto categorizes it. So dairy, produce, bakery, whatever it may be. I'm not even sure how many categories there are, but the idea is that it is grouped by kind of the way things are grouped in a grocery store. So if you're in the produce section, you can see all your produce. Before this, when we were using Todoist, and I do a lot of our grocery shopping. My wife works. I work for myself from home. My schedule is a lot more flexible than hers. So I do a lot of the grocery shopping. And inevitably, I would be in the produce section, get everything I thought we needed, and be on the other side of the store and realize I hadn't gotten bananas, right? Because the list was sorted alphabetically or some other way, and I didn't see it. And it's really great to have all your items grouped by the type of item there are. But what's even better is if it miscategorizes something or you just don't want it in that category for some reason and you move it. So say that I put muffins in there and it keeps putting it in bakery, but I want it somewhere else. Next time I enter muffins on the list, it will put it where I told it to be. So smart, so good. The groceries list support really is fantastic. And even if you don't use reminders, but you share a grocery list with a roommate or a spouse or something, like I would say put your grocery list in reminders. It is that good. And because it's reminders, it also works really well with Siri. And this auto categorization works with items entered via Siri. So if I'm in my car and I hit the button for Siri and CarPlay and I say, add milk to my grocery list, it will add it to the grocery list and it will sort it for me. It is a great feature. I know there are some dedicated grocery list apps out there that do this and more, but to have it in the stock, like from Apple Task Manager is really, really good. I love this feature.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I feel like they're just gobbling up a lot of the space here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, can you imagine if they come out with defer dates? I mean,
oh, I know. It's going to kill a whole nother group of apps.
The other thing though, the reason why I didn't stick with reminders, because that Kanban view was very tempting, is I just felt like capture was always kind of a little bit harder than I was used to.
Yeah.
And I thought I would get used to it, and I never did.
Yeah, I think for me the biggest con of reminders is entry and sort of the overall fiddliness of the user interface, especially on the Mac. And I have pleaded with Apple for years, and I have a pretty good track record of asking for things and reminders and getting them, like the badge matching what's in the to-do list. Like that was me. Like I wrote a blog post about it. I filed a radar. It got added. You're welcome. But the inspector for a task or the entry is just, it's a little bit fiddly, especially coming from something like Todoist or TickTick that has a lot of natural language processing. And it's not perfectly consistent between the platforms. So another thing that I'll take credit for is the task inspector on the iPhone and iPad. You could move a task between lists. You could not do that on the Mac. You had to drag and drop the task from one list to another. It wasn't in the inspector. And thankfully they added that this time around. But it's a lot of small buttons to click. It's a lot of sort of drop downs and things where if it understood better what I was typing, it would be nice. In there, I will say that reminders really seems geared more towards tags than lists. And so you can, with natural language, add a tag. And from the little quick add bar on iOS and iPadOS, you can add a tag. But lists are sort of secondary. And for me, I use this as a list of lists. Like I'm not using tags and reminders. I really don't use tags anywhere. It's just not the way that I work. And that's a little bit frustrating. I wish that they would make lists sort of on even footing with tags. But what's great about it is that there are some workarounds for some of this entry and sort of fiddliness, both on the Mac and on iOS. And so there are two apps on the Mac that I really like. One is called Reminders Menu Bar. And it is, as it says, it's a menu bar app for reminders. something that Apple could add, and then would blow this app out of the water. But you can have a list. So you click on the reminders icon in the menu bar, you can get a list. I have mine also showing me my number of things due today. But at the top of it is a text box, and I can type a reminder, and it does some more natural language stuff than Apple, and it files it away for me, which is really great. And it's the one that I use. I like having my tasks in my menu bar, especially when I'm just on my laptop and may not have reminders visible all the time. The second one is Insta Remind. And if you have used OmniFocus or Todoist and many other apps that have like a quick add feature from anywhere in the system, so they have a hotkey anywhere in the system, I can hit the hotkey and I get a little a text window, and I can type in my task and it goes in. It basically adds that feature to reminders, and it has a bunch of natural language processing, so you can add a list, add a tag, add a due date and time, and it's really great. Insta Remind is fantastic. I will say, if you just look through the website, it feels like maybe it doesn't get a ton of updates, a ton of active development, but honestly, it doesn't need it. Like it does everything I would want it to do, and does a good job at it. And it's in the App Store, but again, the last update was 2 years ago for macOS Monterey. I don't think it's abandoned. Like, I think the developer is still around, but I'm keeping my eye on that, I would say.
Yeah, I created a shortcut as well.
Yes,
you can do this with a shortcut pretty easily.
That's how I do it on the phone. My action button is tied to a shortcut that is just a text field, and it gets saved to the inbox in reminders.
Yeah. Reminders is really good.
It is. But if you do want something that is a bit more detailed than the shortcut, especially on iOS, is Remind Me Faster. A very simple app. You get a text field, and you can set the date and time and task list for an item, and then save it into reminders. It's on the iPhone and iPad. It's been well reviewed. I really like it. And they have a Control Center action. So I actually have Remind Me Faster in Control Center on my phone. So I can swipe down and hit it, type in something, and they get saved and filed away. So there are third-party apps that have gotten around some of the, I don't want to say limitations, but some of the friction points in reminders. But yeah, I've been pretty happy with it. And another con is that, like, my wife likes it. I want to have those shared lists, and she, in the past when I've tried this, has been reluctant and hasn't liked reminders, but something in it has clicked for her this year. So we'll see where I end up at the end of the year. But for now, even though it's a little more friction than I want in a few places, reminders is getting the job done.
Yeah. It was tempting for me. Like I said, the Kanban boards, it's pretty. It's an Apple app, but all those features, the variables I was aiming for OmniFocus lined up better. That's kind of the bottom line. And yeah, I think that's the point for everybody listening, is spend some time on those issues we talked about at the beginning of the show. Think about, what is it that you're solving for? How is it that you want to manage tasks? And there is a good task manager. Every single one of the apps we talked about in the show, I think, could be a perfect solution for the right people, right?
Yeah.
Just see how you fit on it, and let us know what you think. We've got the forums. You can go in and let us know what your favorite task manager is, why, what are the features that it does, what are the itches it's scratching for you. Go over to talk.macpowerusers.com and let us know. If you want to give us feedback, you can do that at relay.fm/MPU. We've got a feedback show coming up, so get it in quick. And if you want to sign up for membership, you can do that as well at relay.fm/MPU. That gets you the ad-free extended version of the show. We'd love to have you as a supporting member. Really helps us keep the lights on. And thanks to our sponsors this week, Squarespace and 1Password. For the More Power Users episode today, I just made a bunch of studio upgrades. I'm shooting a bunch of video, and of course, I want to talk about it, so we're going to do that. Have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you next time in the Mac Power Users.